Jim, isn't it amazing when Michigan can keep this game to a 19-foot 9-inch game inside that three-point line? It's all there.
In March 2000, the 8th-seeded Wisconsin Badgers rushed through the West Regional, defeating Arizona, LSU, and Purdue to claim the Badgers' first Final Four appearance in more than 59 years. Though the Badgers' Cinderella run ended with a Final Four loss in Indianapolis to Big Ten foe and eventual national champ Michigan State, that Wisconsin squad helped elevate the Badgers, long a middling Big Ten program, into a March Madness regular. Wisconsin would make the big dance every year over the next 17 seasons, including 2 additional Final Four runs under Bo Ryan. Today we're going to discuss that memorable 2000 Badgers run with the team's leading scorer, 6'9" forward Mark Vershaw. We're going to seek to understand how an 8-8 Big Ten team, one that never cracked the AP Top 25, one that didn't feature a single all-conference selection, not even an all-honorable mention all-conference nod, defied the odds and captured a spot in the 2000 Final Four. Mark, thanks for joining us here on the 99 podcast.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate having me.
So, Mark, we're going to, really start here how we begin so much here on the 99 podcast, and that's talking a bit about how you first got involved with the game. What's your basketball origin story?
Well, my first love was baseball, and I was, I thought that was going to be my sport when I was in upper elementary school. But thankfully, it came from a public school, K through 8, small. I think we had about 25 people in our class all the way through. But one of my classmates, one of my friends, was Jason Jenkins, who played. He ended up being 6'9" as well. He played on Valparaiso. And was on there for Bryce Drew and the miracle shot. He was on that team. And so he really was basketball, and he got me into it. And I started about 4th grade. And things that I really fell in love with the sport, one was how much you could do to improve your game just by yourself. And the other part that I really loved was you can play all positions. In baseball, I think I may have ended up to be an average or maybe a slightly above average high school pitcher. That would have been about the extent of my abilities. But that was the only position. And with basketball, you got to – I love the fact that you can play all positions and really get better just, with yourself in a hoop. And the area that I grew up in, I was thankful because Peoria basketball, and I'm biased, but I think during that stretch run from 1990 to early 2000, it had the best basketball per capita in the country. And we had guys that not only went on to play in college and play in high majors, but really make significant impacts on their teams. And a lot of them were in the Big Ten. And I think that's what made it unique. And it really brought competition. Like our local high school schedule was brutal. And my senior year, Peoria Manual was the number 1 team in the country. And so it was a great area to be a part of. And I was fortunate. We were blessed. Jason Jenkins went to Valparaiso. My point guard in high school was named to the all-decade first 5 for Division III, won the national championship at Illinois Wesleyan. So it was a great time, and it was a basketball first community, and there was a lot of competition on a daily basis there, both in the season and the off season as well.
You mentioned you could play a bunch of different positions though, but I would imagine, were you always a tall guy, and were you just plucked and because now the game's so different? I would imagine As a tall dude, you were just like, okay, this is where you stand.
Yes, it was. I entered into high school at 6'8", but I was about 165 pounds. So it was not a it wasn't a physical presence when I stepped onto the court. But I loved it. I loved Magic Johnson. Loved Larry Bird. I loved that pass first and being able to do multiple things. I thought maybe I could get a rebound and bring the ball up the court in college, but one time of that, Coach Bennett said, no, we're not doing that. But it was a different game, and I had to figure out a way to, play with my back to the basket. And that was easier in high school. But when you played against, there's a lot of good shot blocking centers in the Big Ten, and you had to learn how to be creative. I think if I went through the game now, I would have just passed all that up and learned how to shoot the 3 a lot better, made life easier.
Top, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So and you end your high school career. I mean, you're a top 50 national recruit. You're not far, Peoria is not too far from the University of Illinois campus, and both your parents are Illinois grads. And, doing some background on you, I think there was also a girlfriend in Champaign at the time, too. So,
Yes.
given all that, how did you end up at Wisconsin?
Well, that girlfriend has been my wife at 22 years. So it was tough. Illinois was my dream school from the time I started. Both my parents went to Illinois. My girlfriend, who's my wife now, was 2 years older. She was at Illinois. Her parents went to Illinois, and it was a dream of mine to play there. But it was an opportunity to try to make a decision on what was the best fit for me, and that uh, was difficult because when you're 17, 16, 17, that's hard to do because there's a lot of voices, and Wisconsin was nobody in my circle uh, promoted Wisconsin. That was not the school. I had people that were trying to say, you got to go here, you got to go there. But I had to look at it, what was the best fit. And Illinois went through a coaching change. Coach Henson was there. He came to watch me play. I thought that was who I had a chance to play for. And then I thought the assistant coach, Coach Collins, would get the job. But then when that didn't happen, the coaching change came in, and Coach Kruger came in, and they had 11 scholarships in 2 years. I think there were 6 in my class, 5 in the other. And I had to look at that and say, none of these players in the current roster are going to be my teammates. What kind of team am I going to be with? And I had a feeling that it was tough. It was tough to say no to Illinois, especially when one of the last times in my official visit, they brought me in and they had the jersey up there, and that was hard to see and say no to. But I knew that what they were moving towards, and I had a feeling, I could be wrong, but I think they were more interested in me as an attempt to try to keep in-state talent in their first recruiting class more than what I could bring to the program. And they didn't lose any sleep when I didn't sign because they had Archibald, Brian Cook. They signed talented 4s and 5s. But for me, I looked at that and I said, it wasn't the right time, which is it's because I think potentially I would have played for Coach Henson and Coach Collins. I think Coach Self. I think there's the timing of it just wasn't right, but it was very difficult to walk away. But I went through the whole recruiting process, so I took advantage of it. And my 5 official visits, I went to Bradley, which was in my hometown. I loved Coach Molinari. I went to Indiana with Coach Knight, Illinois, Wisconsin, Notre Dame, and each of those places I could see enjoying the experience, but I had to figure out what was the right fit for me, and that went through the process. Wisconsin, they told me, Coach Bennett, I can remember he came and watched me play, that was something that was unique. Both him and Coach Knight were kind of similar in that their presence on the summer circuit wasn't as great. And so when they came to see you, that was kind of just special. And they told me that they had 1 scholarship left. They had 4 guys signed, and it was between me and Ryan Hogan, who ended up, I think, going to Kentucky. And I at that point, I said, okay, I'm done. I'm not going to go to Wisconsin. Then I told him, I'm going to go through the process. I was fortunate to have options, but I think Ryan, I don't even remember the sequence of events, but I think Ryan went in a different direction, and they said they would just hold the scholarship. And what drew me to Wisconsin, was Coach Bennett. It was different. I talked to a lot of different coaches on the phone. We didn't have the internet like we do now. I had to research programs through media guides and try to figure out rosters and what they've done and their coaches and how they utilize players. So talking to coaches were a big deal too, to figure out and try to see what they're saying, because they're very good at their job, very good at selling stuff. But when Coach Bennett got on the phone that first time, I didn't know anything about Wisconsin. I knew Michael Finley. I saw the style, but I didn't. There was nothing that I knew about Coach Bennett. And it was different. When he got on the phone, I said, out of all the coaches I talked to, between Coach Bennett and Coach Knight, you could tell they saw the game differently. They talked about it. And I was extremely impressed. And so that's what drew me here to Wisconsin. I thought the style of play fit. for my abilities, or my sometimes lack of athletic abilities. And I thought I came up here for an unofficial visit. They played Indiana that year, and I saw the two things that I was really impressed upon was Coach Bennett. I thought, one, if he could take that team to the NIT, I thought if there was more pieces in place, he could really go far. Because not that team, not a knock against that team, but Sam Oki, I think, led them in every single category as a freshman that year, and you could tell things that were building. They're having the new Kohl Center was being built. The second thing was the fans. We were in the old field house, and they were so passionate about an NIT team. And I said, this team, these fans deserve to see winning basketball. And so those things were impressed. So every time I came to Wisconsin for an official visit, I came away knowing that this was the right fit.
That's interesting because it's so perceptive of you. You mentioned as a 16, 17-year-old, it's hard not to say, follow your heart or be swayed by, really kind of basic things. And it's really perceptive of you that you seem to really dig down and reflect on what's the best spot for me. Where do I feel most comfortable? And I don't think many 17-year-olds have that kind of foresight.
Well, I try to stress this to kids is, your parents, your friends, they're not playing. They're not going through that 4 year. You have such a small window, and I never saw myself as an NBA player, so I knew that, when teams came in or coaches said, "Hey, we can get you to the NBA," and I was like, as a coach or as somebody as a scout, like I didn't see myself as a player. And so I really wanted that college experience to be the best it could be and to enjoy it. And going through the AAU program, and AAU is far different than it was like it is today. It was more elite and a smaller circuit. But I realized that if you're not in the right style, there's so much talent out there. And I was blessed to be able to see that. I went to the Adidas camp between my sophomore and junior year, and Kobe Bryant was there. And so I got exposed to these I was like, there's a lot of talent out here. And so, you have to go to a place that's the best fit for you. And so I was thankful, going through that. I try to stress that to players now even though it's tough, but you kind of know what's the best fit. And you want to go through the process and not get sold on, if coach came in and guaranteed me playing time, I said, no, how could you do that? You can't guarantee me. You can show me an opportunity to play, but if you're guaranteeing me, I know you're guaranteed 40 other players too. So the math doesn't really add up. So those are things that I tried to be aware of or conscious of going through the process.
You mentioned Coach Bennett. We're going to talk a lot about him on this podcast, but you did sneak in Coach Knight and take an official visit to Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
Favorite Coach Knight story in terms of your recruitment?
Oh my gosh. There was the one that I guess would stand out. Well, there's I guess the two one quick, and then one that made me laugh. One was we went through and he was showing me through Assembly Hall, and we came across an older woman that came through with her daughter, and she asked Coach Knight for directions to like the library. Obviously, didn't know who he was. The daughter's face was just shocked, and Coach Knight couldn't have been nicer. And didn't even. And as they're walking away, you can hear the daughter kind of get to her mom, like, "Don't you know who that was?" And she just viewed him as a nice person. But they had a scrimmage after a football game, and being Indiana, they had a scrimmage, and there's like 10,000 people that showed up to the scrimmage. I think there was more people at the scrimmage than the football game. And he was down there, and he had one player, and I don't remember the name, but there's a coach that was, I think it was an overseas player, and they had a coach that was kind of like a translator, and he brought him onto the floor, and he said, "Can you explain to him in his language, why this was wrong? Because he sure doesn't understand English." And the 10,000 people were laughing, and he had that factor that just, commanded attention, and it was unique. And that was another thing that was hard to it was hard to say no to that. But again, the one thing about Coach Bennett though was it was obvious how much other coaches respected him, because throughout that whole process, there was not another coach that, when other coaches heard I was interested in Wisconsin, every single one of them, including Coach Knight, was like, said such positive things about Coach Bennett, and that was obvious. I mean, it was impressive to me that that was a different level of respect that coaches had for him.
Yeah. And so you end up at Wisconsin. I want to get a sense of just, you come from Peoria, great basketball in Peoria, but now you're playing in the Big Ten. So describe for us kind of your freshman season and your first taste of Big Ten basketball. What were some of the biggest adjustments you had to make and the biggest things you had to learn? Maybe it was the first practice or the first workout session, or when you realize like, wow, I'm at a different level. Take us through just kind of that kind of integration process to Big Ten basketball.
Well, I really thought I wasn't good enough to play when I started out. And hopefully those tapes are burned, but if you saw the first 2 exhibition games, I got booed coming off the court by my own fans.
Those
Wisconsin.
fans that made you come there, huh?
Oh my gosh! Well, and they were rightfully so. We played the exhibition games. I wasn't playing great. I thought about redshirting. Coach Bennett was outstanding, and I remember then going into Marquette was our first game, and I was the last guy to get in the game. Like, he went through everybody else, and then he was like, I guess we got to try this kid. And so that was, and I was able to go in and compete, and that was, a positive thing. And I had so that experience, but my first test or taste of Big Ten basketball, we played Michigan in the field house. And our freshman year did not go the way it should have. Sam Oakey was supposed to be there the whole year. He transferred out. Ty Calderwood was supposed to be our point guard. He sat out with an injury for that season. So when you take those 2 pieces off of a roster, that's hard for a team. And I think that team had a chance to be a tournament team if those 2 pieces were there the whole year. But it did give us a chance to get a lot of minutes and take some hard lessons as well. But my first taste of Big Ten basketball, we played Michigan at the field house. I'm not starting. I'm a bench guy. And Michigan had an outstanding front line. I think Ward, Maceo Baston, and Tractor Trailer. And so at 6'9", Tractor Trailer was who he was. And Maceo Baston, I think, is 6'11". And so Coach, he goes, and I'm sitting there watching. I'm like, wow, this is great. And the field house is so loud. And so it was a different type of I've never had that kind of volume in a game. So he checks me into the game, and I go up and I ask the assistants, well, who am I guarding? And I think Ward was the number 1 player in the country coming out of high school. Tractor Trailer was, unbelievable, one of the best hands and feet for the guy that size. Maceo Baston's 6'11", athletic as can be. And I come in, I say, who am I guarding? And the assistants kind of gave me the face and like, no. So I asked Coach Bennett, I said, who am I guarding? And he said, and he just kind of shakes it off. And I'm like, I have to know who I'm supposed to guard. So I say it louder. Who am I guarding? He looks out on the floor, sees those 3 guys, and he just kind of slumps his head. and he's like, well, Ward. And I was like, that's one of the worst shots of confidence going into a game. And and I went into there, and I remember Ward caught it at the top of the key. He's a small forward, and he kind of smiles, and I'm like, oh, that's never a good sign when somebody smiles. But the last thing I would say, I got hit with a back screen by a Tractor Trailer in that game, and I've never been. It was like being, drop kicked in the back and shocked with electricity at the same time, and I couldn't just fall. I tried, and the sound I made, but I tried to stay as tough as I can be. But I remember running down the court, and I said, I have never since been hit with a back screen like that. But that was my first game, and I said, well, that's a welcome into this league.
Who was the teammate who didn't call that one out, huh?
You know what? I don't fault him, because that was a completely different player.
You mentioned Coach Bennett, who, in the great respect he had, and you seem to talk already very glowingly about him and maybe the important role he played in your life. So what's one word you would use to describe him in?
I'm going to cheat. I'm just going to say Hall of Fame. And he's a Hall of Fame coach. And the reason I say that is I know if you put up a resume or overall resume, but if the Hall of Fame was based off of what other coaches felt about and the respect level and what they said, the admiration, he would be like a first ballot Hall of Famer. There's no question. When you looked at how many of his instructional videos do well when they did the polling of what coach would you want to go and see in a clinic, he's always in the top 5 or 3 coaches. And the other part is I'm biased, but I don't think there's a better coach in NCAA history in Division One about building and rebuilding programs, because he did it at Green Bay. He took, I think, the first year. I don't know if he won 4, 5 games, but
They were a lowly program, no question.
and he turned it into a team that, and I know he left already for Wisconsin, but they beat Jason Kidd in the tournament. His teams with his son Tony were unbelievable. And then he came to Wisconsin, where they made the tournament in 47 and 94, and that was it. So twice in 50 years, and took him to a Final Four. And then he went to Washington State, which, if anybody has gone to Pullman, Washington, my wife and I, we were out there for his last year and a half, and kind of in a coaching role out there, and not on the staff, but in the program. So we got to see. I mean, in Pullman, Washington, you had to go across the border to Idaho to go to Walmart. Like, it is a very hard place to win in, and it turned it into a top 10 team. And so for those factors, that's what I feel about him. And I wish he would get he doesn't seek it, but I wish there'd be more acclamation for his career, because I think it's very, very well respected.
Yeah, very well said there about Coach Bennett. And it's worth noting, you mentioned his son, Tony, who's, of course, now the current coach at Virginia, national championship coach at Virginia. He was a part of the program when you were at Wisconsin, too. So what was a young Tony Bennett like?
Well, he was the best player in our team, without. And even when I went back a few years later when I was coaching, I saw them practice, and this is with Coach Ryan, and Devin Harris was there, and Coach Ryan had his assistants playing, and Tony and he was still the best player in the gym. But having him there, to me, and I regret this, because I was a little starstruck, because here you got a guy who shot 50%, the NCAA career leader, and he NBA player, and he came in, and it was just kind of like, I didn't want to bother him, but how much he, wanted to help players and get into coaching. I should have worked with him on my 3-point shot early, and and just figured out, because being with and having a chance to be around him, and Coach Bennett, and for Tony Bennett, allowed me to kind of be a part of some of their programs. I got to see some of that stuff that made him a better shooter, and I became a better shooter when I was a coach than when I was a player, because of that. You could see his progress, but he was outstanding, and you could tell just the skills that he had. He has that special it factor to him that draws people, and has a tremendous understanding and feel for the game, and so those are things you could see, right? But still, it was hard not to get started. And then when you saw him shoot the basketball, it made you feel bad, because I've seen him walk into the gym, no warm ups, and he could hit 33s in a row, and he could shoot without leaving his feet. He could shoot from half court, and that was the strength that he had, and it did. It made you like, well, whatever. I made 6 out of 7 shots. That's nothing. So it did. He made you feel bad.
You talked about a rough freshman campaign, but you move into your sophomore campaign, and that's the 1998-1999 season. You guys actually spend much of the season in the top 25, and you make the tournament. You talk about Coach Bennett being this great turnaround artist. You make the tournament, the Badgers, that is, for only the 3rd time since 1947. But the season ends with a disappointing first-round loss to Missouri State. So how did you see that season and how it ended, and how did that change the vibe of the program?
We got to taste success early on. We had 2 senior guards, and but it started to fall apart down the stretch, and we were playing some very inconsistent basketball. Things that worked for us just weren't happening, and we stumbled our way into the tournament. Like it was on, I think we lost to Iowa in the Big Ten tournament. Like it was a team on the decline, and we were playing our worst basketball at the wrong time. And we went into the tournament though we thought we could make a jump, but it was a tough matchup. Coach Alford was at Missouri State, and we just our offense was so bad. But what made it worse is we scored 32 points in the tournament. Our football team scored 33 in the Rose Bowl, and that headline was everywhere, and it drove us into uh, really wanting to come back and change course. So it was a different off season. It was a no frills type of all season that happens after that kind of a loss. But it wasn't an immediate payout the next year. But thankfully, we kind of had an opposite season where we played some of our worst basketball early, and then got to the point where we were playing very well at the end. So
Yeah,
it
so
was
that's that Final Four season, of course, you're
yes.
talking about. And you mentioned, the end of your sophomore year, that disappointing loss, we'll call it, to Missouri State. You guys are motivated. You guys are hitting it hard over the summer. So as the 1999-2000 season opens, this is the one that ends in the Final Four. But what seemed like realistic expectations for that squad as the season opened?
Well, we're very hopeful to compete in the Big Ten, be in the upper part of the Big Ten, and be a tournament team. And we felt we had experienced players. We added Roy Boone. We had John Bryant. We had some pieces that were added to team guys that have already gone through everything. And on paper, we had a team. Now we're in a very competitive league. I think my sophomore year, we had, Northwestern didn't make the tournament. But they had an unbelievable team. Like it was, I think we had 7 or 8 of the 11 teams that were in the top 25. So it was heavy competition. And we had 2 Final Four teams in Ohio State and Michigan State in 99. But we still felt we could be an upper half team and make it into the tournament and have that type of season. And it just wasn't going in that. We were an NIT team at best. And so something had to change.
So let me actually stop you there because I want to give just some context around this. That 2000 team ends up in the Final Four. It does not crack the top 25 once. You drop a mid-January game to Penn State. Not exactly a basketball powerhouse, and you guys are sitting at 9-8 overall. You have some win against ranked teams in Texas and Temple and Illinois. You got those on your resume, but there are also losses to Northern Illinois and South Florida as well. So you mentioned things had to change. What's the turnaround in that season? And what set you guys off from playing, some kind of inconsistent basketball to what prompts that run to the great run you guys eventually have?
It was, we changed our offense, and we had done that, always in the blocker mover segment, but we had 6 games left. Coach Bennett said we had to win 4 out of our 6. To make it into the tournament. We changed the offense where I got to be a mover, and we changed it to where it led us to do some different things offensively. Defensively, we're very consistent, but offensively, we couldn't string together enough points. And I remember we came out against Iowa, and I was like determined to make this offense work because I got to move side to side, top to bottom, and I was really excited about it. We go to Iowa, I get in foul trouble, which I don't. My coach Bennett would say I didn't play defense well enough to get into foul trouble, and I thought, that this offense is out the window. We'll go back to our blocker lane. And then even Coach Bennett, I think he bumped an official at halftime. He got teed up, should have got thrown out probably. And it was that moment in the locker room that it was kind of like our backs couldn't be farther against the wall. And we came out in the second half and we stayed with the offense. I think we would put together a very impressive defensive stretch where we held them scoreless for a number of minutes. And we won that game. And then through that stretch, the only team we lost to from that point on was Michigan State, all the way to the Final Four. And so what the offense did was it allowed us to put enough points on the board, uh, and it made us hard to beat. And it was kind of a right connection between our defense and the offense. We didn't do something that was too uncharacteristic, that we were taking bad shots or turning the ball over, but it flowed very well. And I think that was uh, something that made this team play at a level that, and again, I could bias, but I really felt we were the second best team in the country during that stretch, because we were a much different team. And I think when this team scored enough points without changing the way we played, we were a hard team to beat.
And so you talk about this little surge to end the season, and you end it, the regular season, that is, with a home win against number 14 Indiana. But you guys are 16-12 heading into the Big Ten tournament. Now you help your resume in the tournament by reaching the semifinals of the Big Ten tournament, which, you lose to Michigan State. We're going to come back to that squad, and that was a tough one for you guys. But as you head in, Selection Sunday in 2000 is not the big event it is today, but still it matters.
Mm-hmm.
Were you guys sweating out Selection Sunday, or did you guys feel you were pretty firmly in the tournament?
I felt because of our strength of schedule and coach, and we said we lost to Northern Illinois. Most high major programs mean that's a home loss. No, we went to Northern Illinois and we played them on their 500th game, and they had like a parade, and it was not the atmosphere most high major schools. But Coach Bennett, with his background, he was like, "We're going to go out and we're going to play these teams." So we played Ball State when they had Bonzi Wells. We went to Green Bay. We went to UW Milwaukee. Like, that was Coach's way. But as a player, we were like, hey, can we have it a little bit easier on the schedule? But our strength of schedule, and then the way that we were playing down the stretch, I felt, in the conference that we're in, it would be hard for us not to make it. Now, I didn't think we would be rewarded with a high seed or anything. I knew we would be in a challenging spot, but we felt very strongly that with all those factors that we were in, I thought we could have been in after the regular season, but beating Purdue in the second game of the Big Ten tournament, I think showed that we were a team deserving to be in.
Absolutely. And you mentioned you didn't think you'd be rewarded with a high seed, and you weren't necessarily. You got an 8 seed. You guys open up against Fresno State. That team has NBA talent. It has a championship coach in Jerry Tarkanian. The interesting thing about that game is there's a 23-2 run in the second half that seals that game. So how did that game set up everything else that followed for you guys?
I mean, obviously up to that point, our team, we hadn't won a game in the tournament. So it wasn't like, oh, we can win this one, look ahead to the next game. This was it for us. This was a Super Bowl type game to get. Each game was like that for our team. And that roster was one of those rosters that you were at the scouting, you start laughing, because they had Skip to my Lou was their Rafer Alston was their point guard. They had the nation's leading scorer and Courtney Alexander. They had the nation's leading rebounder. They had Melvin Ely, who's played in the NBA forever, and from Chicago. And so it was like, we just looked like, who are you guarding? Like, because there was no easy out. And but the thing that happened in the tournament was we were facing teams that haven't seen us or haven't played that kind of style, and that the discipline needed to outlast us. And the frustration would grow, and then the second half they went to a zone, and they left John Bryan open to shoot. I think it was 3 or 4 threes from the same spot, same play, and that stretch opened the game, and then they just broke down. And even though they had more talent in their positions, that showed us that, hey, we have an opportunity here. But then the next game we were going to face that same kind of roster in Arizona. But it was a win that we celebrated, and we were thrilled to advance and to be a part of that next game in the tournament.
Yeah, so you mentioned that next game in the second round. That's top seeded Arizona. So let's. You mentioned you come out against Fresno State. Well, who are you guarding? There's no easy out. That Arizona team: Gilbert Arenas, Richard Jefferson, Luke Walton, Jason Gardner. That team was in the top 10 all season. Yet it's the Badgers who control that game. Arizona only leads once, and that's at 2-0. What's the story of that game?
Oh my gosh. Well, one of the stories is of those four guys you mentioned, the most we spent on our scouting report was on Michael Wright, was their
A Chicago
coach
boy
Chicago.
too.
Yeah. And he was the one the coach was concerned with because we had a double. And then by doubling him, you were leaving Jefferson and Arenas on the, on the perimeter open. And, uh, but the story, I think that team was young, and that was a huge factor. And they hadn't seen our style of play. There was no team, if I can recall, there's no team in the Pac-10 at that time that played similar style to us. So they had gone a long stretch without seeing a team that did what we did, and it was frustrating for them. Things that were easy, uh, the style of play and the flow of the game was different, and the frustration is the same story. The frustration kept mounting in the second half. Now they were extremely talented, so they were able to make a little late surge at the end. But most of the game we were up double figures, and so we commanded. Then they came back. I think we ended up maybe winning by 7, but I think that was a similar pattern that we saw teams that came in, and you could see at some point in that second half that frustration would boil over. Things that were accustomed to just weren't available, and they had to uh, it was just a different style, a different type of game. And so that's where I think experience played a heavy factor in that game.
You know, and it seems like a similar story plays out then in the Sweet 16. You're facing LSU. That's a team ranked 10th in the nation at the close of the regular season. You guys hold them to 14 points in the first half. You go on to win 61-48. It seems one of the themes of at least these first three games is teams not taking Wisconsin as seriously as they should, and certainly not being familiar with your guys' style. Is that LSU game really another example of that? Is that really the theme of those first three games?
I would think I definitely would say so, and I think if I had to compare, our style, Wisconsin style, if you look at, and we're completely different, but if you look at Syracuse with their zone, our schools, our programs, it seems to be better when we face high major teams in the tournament because most of those teams that you don't generally face a conference team early in the tournament. So you get the advantage of playing a high major team that they haven't played against the zone or they haven't played against the pack defense. And that's why it's not a surprise when Syracuse is the lower seed that they advance because they're playing high major teams. And I think some of the opposite is true. Sometimes when our style plays like we struggled in the year before and the year after, and if you look at Virginia's program, sometimes those hardest games are the first ones because until you get into where you have that advantage with your style against high major, because when you're playing teams that you have to adjust to as well, because they might have a 6-5 4-man or they might have a different lineup than what you've seen your whole conference season. I think some of that plays into it, and the other part um, was the veteran play. We had an older team that had gone through the hard. It wasn't an older team that sat the bench for 2 years. We had guys that played as freshmen, so that helped. LSU was the best example of that because they were screaming and cursing at each other in the second half, and when that happened, it was a complete. We felt we had broken them down, like broke their will, and that in those 3 games there was some similarity to it. And the other thing is, it wasn't like we were the cardiac kids; like we were beating these teams soundly, and it wasn't like these wild upsets. And I think all those factors kind of played into that.
It's interesting. You were pretty diplomatic about this, but up until that point, those first three games, those three teams in Fresno State, Arizona, and LSU, your teammate Mike Kelly would later term them, quote, soft.
Oh,
But those are his words.
wow!
But that doesn't apply to the team you face in the Elite Eight, and that's Purdue. You talk about this is a team that's familiar with you. In many ways, plays a very similar style, if not,
Mhm.
maybe not the same plays and things like that. But they know Big Ten basketball. You're not going to surprise them, and you're staring across from them. What's your level of confidence going into the Purdue game?
I mean, there's some benefits to familiarity because with all those previous 3 teams, the talent that you saw on tape when the scouting would come on, you were like, okay, like Stromile Swift. I mean, there's somebody 6'9" who could touch the top of the backboard. Like we hadn't seen that all year, so there's some of that unknown. But on the other side of it, you know what you're going in for. and there's no surprises. And so this was going to be a heavyweight fight, and we're in New Mexico with the the altitude and everything that went into that game. You knew the physicality was going to be there, and we also had what made it unique was that uh, not only had two conference teams playing, but Coach Katie across the sideline was nearing the end of his career, uh, and we had two coaches that had not been to a Final Four, and
Mhm.
so and Purdue had Coach Katie had amazing teams going through, but Coach Bennett and Coach Katie, you could tell there was a different feel about this is kind of like the one shot here. And so that even added even more emotional aspects to this. They had a senior veteran team. We had a veteran team. Um, so you knew that was good. It was just a different type of Elite Eight game.
You mentioned Coach Bennett on the doorstep of the Final Four. And from what I heard about him, he would talk a lot about not winning a national title. He would talk about getting to the Final Four. It seemed like that was kind of where his mind was, his ultimate goal as a coach. It kind of seemed, read some backstory on him. So when he's there, what do you recall maybe about his pregame speech in Albuquerque, or just the vibe around him as you're heading into this Elite Eight game? And this is his shot.
You know, his speech, and it's funny because I don't remember what was said. I remember it was a coach that was honest in how he was feeling and how much this would mean to him, and seeing quality basketball on the floor. And I remember earlier, not in that pregame speech, like he even said that he would give his right arm to coach in the Final Four, and so it was something that I don't know if he felt it was obtainable at that time with that program. Maybe that program would get the kind of players that could put him in that position, but so it was almost like he didn't. He displayed his passion and his desire and what it would mean, and it was a speech that it was tough because there was a long ramp to go back to the floor, and it was you were so on an emotional pitch that you were like, okay, now we got to kind of recollect. So that walk helped to get us back into a mindset, because if you just left it, it was a very emotional locker room before a game, and but we knew what we were heading into, and I think if we were a younger team, I'm sure you would. It might have been different, but we had guys that knew what we're kind of getting into, and so when that tip happened, I think we were ready to go. But that speech was powerful of a coach that really had a strong desire and to have an opportunity to coach in the Final Four and deserved it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to take you to something you've said about that game. It is the most intense game I've ever been a part of. What do you mean
Yes.
by that? Because you talked earlier about getting hit by a tractor trailer backstage. So,
Yes.
what does intensity feel like in that game? Why is that the most intense game you ever played in?
I think with everything that was on the line, but the added factor too of we wanted it for Coach Bennett as bad. Just obviously you'd want to go to a Final Four regardless, but we wanted to give that experience to Coach Bennett. But on the other sideline, they wanted to give it to Coach Katie. And so if every possession was, in fact, that was the fourth time we were playing that year. Every possession from the tip to there, it was everything. It seemed like there was so much weight on every, and for us, we have never been in that position. Other teams that have been to Elite Eights, it would not be that way because they would have more experience. We felt that any mess up, any missed rebound, something could cost us a Final Four. So our intensity was there, and I think the best example of that is, the years go on, you might not be 100% correct, but I believe we were up 4 in the last possession. We're on defense. Typically, a team that's up 4 is playing not to foul and to try to not give them an easy three. And if you watch that, and I don't, uh, we were so into the moment that we played defense like it was 0-0. And I can remember that possession because it was not the way most teams would defend in that situation, but we were the same defense intensity. The shot goes up, it's missed, and I forget who gets the rebound, if it was Kowski probably. And it just took us a second to like jolt out of it before we realized the game was actually over, because there was no like pre-celebration or no. You can see that, and I think those are signs of why that game was different for us. I'm sure there's many other Elite Eight games that players have played in that would say, but I think they had some unique aspects to it. The setting, the two coaches on the sideline, and the teams that were involved.
And just it seems like the focus that was involved there. You know, sports psychologists always talk about being in the zone. It seemed you give that example of the last possession and maybe not understanding all the circumstances around it. I mean, you understand it intellectually in the terms of, you know, the clock's winding down and, you know, but just the intense focus that game seemed to require.
Mm-hmm.
So the game's over. You're on the winning side. Wisconsin's first Final Four berth in 59 years. What's the aftermath like?
You know, it was. I don't. Sometimes there was moments where it was like people that have never been in that situation. That's you could tell that from our team because we had some guys that ran up and jumped on a scorer's table. It collapsed. We were kind of running around. We didn't have like you see like Duke or Carolina. Those make their 90th Final Four. Like they're expected and they know what to do and their coaches. We were just everything was so new and I the celebration was great. It was just we're still kind of in shock too, and then seeing Coach Bennett was great too. I had in that mist we had a chance to embrace and it was good to see that kind of validation and of what he's done and what he's accomplished. And then for us, like it was a dream. It was a dream to be in a team to make a Final Four, to get the hat and the T-shirt. You know, like that. Now they have all the confetti and everything added to it, but the hat and the T-shirt, and then getting a part of that net. That seemed like it was you know a little bit like a movie experience. Like that wasn't real, and it didn't really feel real for that time frame. But it was unique experience and very very blessed to have opportunity to enjoy that.
And what are those next couple days? You guys, when you guys get back to Madison from Albuquerque, what are those next couple days in Madison like for you?
It was I try to say it was a little bit like seeing a little bit of a celebrity type lifestyle because obviously there was a lot of attention playing at a Big Ten school, but then you start getting more like we had Bob Ryan come into the Kohl Center to interview us. Like it was, you start getting the national and we had CBS that were doing things in between that to prepare for the Final Four for their coverage, and it was different type. We had people that would come up and have like glossy photos of our team for autographs, and I was like, "Where'd you get that photo?" it was really nice. So we had those kind of moments. The scene coming back to Madison was special because they told us the football field. They're going to take us to the football field, and when we flew back in, uh, the lights were on the football field, but it was empty. And we're thinking we're going to show up, and there's going to be 9 people there. But everybody was real excited. And they took us in the bus, and when we ran out and we saw it was like 30,000 people on the other side of that stadium at midnight. That was unique and special as well. A lot of fun. But then it turned to, you know, uh, let's figure out a way to try to win this. We were playing a very good basketball, and so that focus turned now to figure out, Michigan State had been there the year before. They have experience. They've been through this, but can we figure out a way to win?
So you, as you kind of allude to, in Indianapolis for the Final Four, you faced Michigan State again. They've beaten
Mm-hmm.
you 3 times that season. What made that Spartan squad so tough?
Well, first there was a block charge call in their Iowa State game that could have made us.
Infamous.
Oh, if the
We've had Paul Shirley on the podcast discussing that. So yeah.
and not that Iowa State was going to be anything, but I thought we would have matched up better with a Tinsley Pfizer type matchup than Michigan State. What made them unique and special, and I think they're one of the better champions that the NCAA has had in the 2000s, was their ability to change styles. Not many teams, what they did in the Final Four, they beat us at our game, and then they turned around and ran Florida off the floor. And I can't remember too many championship teams that could change like that. And they didn't have a weakness. They had a player, like Morris Peterson, that could score when scoring wasn't available. He could make his own shots. They had a point guard who was outstanding in distributing the ball. They had tough guys. They played their roles well. They're extremely well coached. But I thought that team's ability to change, because there's a lot of, obviously you have to have talent to win, but that ability there, they have veteran leadership, uh, made them a special team. And it was unfortunate that we had they weren't either on the other side of the bracket or that Iowa State game, but they were truly deserving of winning the whole thing.
We talked earlier about how maybe LSU, Arizona, well, not maybe, they did maybe underestimate you guys. But that wasn't going to happen with Michigan State. They knew what you guys were doing. And that was, as you say, a tough-minded veteran team with NBA talent. That game, that Final Four game, it's 19-17 at the half, though. So you're in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are you guys thinking at halftime? What's the plan as you head out to the second half?
And I know people got on us, for that score, but I would much rather have had our experience in the Final Four than Marquette's with Dwayne Wade. And I think, if I recall right, they maybe lost by 30 to Kansas in the Final Four. Like we were
Hey,
down.
you got 20 minutes to go, and you're
Yes.
there. I mean, it's a 2-point game.
We're
That's
down.
what I think anyone wants in the Final Four, right?
Yes. I mean, the fans and all that, that aren't familiar with us may have been upset with the 1917 score, but we're down 2 to the eventual national champions. We had to figure out a way to score more, obviously, and it was tough. And the difference in that stretch, I think Morris Peterson made a stretch where I think he scored 7 points and extended the game. And then we were in a position that we just couldn't, or we had to score in ways that weren't to our strengths. And so we ended up losing by, I think, by 12. And that was tough. Michigan State, that was the one team that didn't try to do anything. They still tried to run their break, but they didn't try to do anything different they just outlasted. They were willing to outlast us, and willing to use and just kind of say, okay, we'll play your game and we'll see how many points you end up with at the end, because they had guys that could put the ball in the basket. But it was tough because going back, obviously individually, I did nothing to help us score. I wish going back in, I could have been a better offensive player at that game to give us a chance to be in it down the stretch. And individually, that was a failure on my part. But as a team, I think that was a point. Second half, I think the story was Morris Peterson being able to extend that game from a 1 possession or 2 possession game to multiple possession game.
Yeah, well, he didn't enjoy a long NBA career because he sucked.
Yeah.
So, and as you mentioned, it's a 12-point loss for you guys, 53-41. So you did pick up the scoring in the second half. It's just they really picked it up.
Yes.
Take us into the locker room after that game.
We were disappointed. We thought we had a shot to maybe crack the code on Michigan State, but it wasn't as heartbreaking as I would assume. Being if we were in the losing end of the Elite Eight, we felt we reached a level and accomplished some things that even beyond our expectation. And so when it was done, it was kind of that feeling like there's still a disappointment of losing, but it wasn't as bad because of where we were at that time. And I think in that game, in that setting, and then to see them the next night do what they did against an extremely talented Florida team, you got a sense that we lost to the national champions, and we lost, and the best team won that tournament. So those things, if we felt we were better or something, it might have been a little different, but it made us feel grateful that we were in that position and got to experience what we did that tournament.
In that run of that 2000 team, that really transforms perspectives about Wisconsin and what's possible for basketball in Madison. And of course, that the program has enjoyed a remarkable success since then, and many point to the 2000 team as the one that really redefined what Wisconsin basketball could be. So, when you reflect on that run here today, 22 years later, what does it mean to you?
Well, one thing I think it um, solidifies Coach Bennett's, his legacy, and I think when Virginia won the national championship for Tony Bennett, that it does something for you, So anybody that tries to criticize or say you could do it this way or that way, those kind of things help to kind of say no, this is it was done the right way. Um, and I think that's what the Final Four did. But for the program in Wisconsin, one of the things, like I said, that drew me to there, Wisconsin, was the fans and how passionate they were. And you saw the change in football when Barry Alvarez came and the extended, very similar with Coach Bennett. Like he brought the one style, I believe, that's going, because I think Wisconsin went through every different style you can get to try to be successful before Coach Bennett, and he brought the blueprint that said, "This is how you win here." And it's been altered. He said, kind of like Coach Bennett built the house, Coach Ryan got to redecorate it, and now Coach Guard too gets. Uh, but the blueprint's very similar, where you got guys that understand the value of the basketball. They work for good shots, and they work defensively, um, and they have high character guys. And I think that blueprint, like in football, they've had some coaching changes in basketball too, and that's, we're proud of that. When I came here, it was 50 years, 2 tournaments, and then they made it the year before I got here, and then from '99, I think they had a 20-year run of tournaments. And what they're doing this year, it's very, very, thankful that the fans of Wisconsin get, there's kids today that are even on that roster that know nothing but winning Wisconsin basketball, and that's something that we take pride that we're a part of.
Yeah, I think that culture shift, when that happens, I've talked with Casey Calvary, who was a part of the Gonzaga team that really set off their run, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that culture shift, I think when you're a part of that, I think the Badgers of today, the fans, they owe a great amount of respect to the team and what you guys pulled off there in 2000. So, Mark, before we get out of here, I just want to close out the show with some quick kind of run and gun style questions, a little bit different than your Badgers offense, okay?
No problem.
So, you ready? Let's go with this. Who was the heart of Wisconsin's 2000 Final Four team?
Um,
Who made that team go?
I would say it was the pillars of Coach Bennett. I think it's our team exemplified. I know this is not as run and gun as maybe like, but this is how we work at Wisconsin. But I think the pillars, guys that went out there that played for each other. And as easy as that sounds, that's not always the case. We have a lot of guys that like to grab stat sheets. We didn't have a team like that. So we had guys that wanted to win for each other and played for each other.
Gotcha. Let's use up the shot clock on these.
Okay.
No. All right. Obviously, Cole, great place to play. We know it's one of the toughest arenas to play in the country. What is the coolest arena you played in, not named Cole?
The barn in Minnesota. You got the raised floor, the setup, and you got a huge. Well, when I played, they had a huge Kevin McHale poster on the wall. So I always loved that atmosphere.
That's awesome. The wildest opposing fans.
Michigan State. They did it the right way. They put the fans down on the floor and they put the donors a little bit higher. And their student section was ready and well researched when they came on the floor. So you heard some very unique things during warm-ups.
All right, I'm going to take a detour here really quick. Tell me about the Orange Crush at Illinois, since you did not go there, and many of those guys knew you. How rough was that?
It was different. It was a little intense. And they put their fans right around the edge at that time, which was a horrendous atmosphere for the opposing team and dangerous, because you were doing layups and you were 6 feet from the fans, and I thought there was only a matter of time before something would happen. But they had some very unique sayings, and they knew what to try to get under my skin.
Gotcha.
Yes.
How did your girlfriend, now wife, did she go to those games, and how did she
Yes.
kind of respond to some of this environment?
Well, it was tough. I mean, my dad, his whole closet's orange and blue, with Illinois stuff, and so it was difficult. And I had friends that were there, and but it was hostile atmosphere, and some of that, it's part of it. But then, those are great experiences too. You can look at it and try to take it personally, but I just enjoyed it because that was the atmosphere I was hoping to be a part of. But they they were intense, and they had really good teams my junior and senior year, so that didn't make it very easy either.
Gotcha. The most impressive opponent you ever played against?
Oh gosh. There's a lot that come to mind. If you look at some of the guys that had the best careers, like a Zach Randolph, even though he was there for like 1 year, um, but Bonzi Wells, when we had to go to Ball State, I think he dropped 33 on us when they beat us. Um, I, he he did everything in that game, and to score 33 on us is very hard to do, especially in that year.
Some
And
teams don't score 33
no,
on us.
and he did that, and he still has a dunk that in my mind is still an unbelievable, where he took it with one hand to two, back to one, and dunked it, and I thought that's a different player. It was hard to, you couldn't match up with him. He was just one of those guys that unless you had a clone of him out there, you couldn't guard him.
Mark, you've been so kind-hearted throughout all this presentation, but I want to know this. Who was the team you took the most pleasure in beating?
I said enough about Michigan State, even though it's still hard. Illinois would be another one, just because they had three guys from Peoria Manual who beat us, and in high school. So it was even for all those that went into it, to beat Illinois was just a little bit added, because you were kind of winning for Wisconsin, and also for East Peoria as well.
That's awesome. Well, let's close it there, Mark. Thanks for joining us here on the 19.9 podcast to talk Wisconsin Badger hoops, buddy.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the 19.9 podcast. If you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, make sure you do. And while you're at it, leave us a rating or review. 5 stars only, like the basketball camp. We also have links to all of 19.9 social media so you never miss a release. Until next time,